Everything you think you know about Vikings is wrong. Those iconic horned helmets never existed. Just bloodthirsty raiders? Not even close. While Hollywood painted Vikings as one-dimensional barbarians, archaeology tells a different story. These misunderstood Norsemen established trade networks stretching from North America to Baghdad, created intricate art that still influences design today, and founded cities you might have visited. Their ships were so advanced, they're still studied by naval engineers. Ready to discover the Vikings that history class never taught you? The horned helmet myth. Have you ever wondered why Vikings are always shown wearing horned helmets? It's in movies, cartoons, sports logos, and even Halloween costumes. These horned helmets have become the universal symbol of Vikings. There's just one small problem. No actual Viking helmet with horns has ever been found. Not one. In all the archaeological digs across Scandinavia, researchers have never discovered a single Viking helmet with horns attached. So, where did this iconic image come from? The horned helmet myth began in the 1800s, far removed from the actual Viking age, which lasted from roughly 793 to 1066 CE. The real culprit wasn't historians, but artists. In 1876, costume designer Carl Emil Doppler created elaborate outfits for Wagner's epic Norse-inspired opera cycle Der Ring des Nibelungen. Doppler outfitted his Norse heroes with winged and horned helmets to make them look more dramatic and mythical on stage. These theatrical costumes caught the public's imagination and created a visual shorthand for Viking that stuck in popular culture. Early Hollywood films cemented this false image in our minds. Movies from the early 20th century portrayed Vikings with these dramatic horned helmets because they looked impressive on screen. The 1928 silent film The Viking helped popularize this look, and by the time Kirk Douglas starred in The Vikings in 1958, the horned helmet had become inseparable from our image of these Norse seafarers. Comics, television, and sports teams like the Minnesota Vikings continued to reinforce this made-up fashion choice. What did real Viking helmets actually look like? Archaeological evidence tells a very different story. Real Viking helmets were practical fighting gear, simple, effective metal or leather caps designed for actual combat. Most were conical or rounded to deflect blows from swords and axes. Some had a simple nose guard extending down from the brow, but that's about as fancy as they got. These helmets were typically made from a single piece of iron or from several pieces riveted together. Think about it from a practical perspective. Horns on a helmet would be incredibly dangerous in battle. They'd provide enemies with something to grab onto, making it easy to yank your head around or pull your helmet off. The extra weight would strain your neck during long battles. Horns would also catch on low doorways, tree branches, and ship rigging. Not ideal for seafaring raiders. Most importantly, horns would make helmets much more expensive and time-consuming to produce with no actual combat benefit. The best example of what Vikings really wore on their heads comes from Jumanbu, Norway. In 1943, archaeologists discovered the only complete Viking helmet ever found, dating to around 970 CE. This helmet consisted of a rounded iron cap made from several pieces riveted together with a simple eye guard and what was likely a mail curtain to protect the neck. It's practical, effective, and notably horn-free. The Jumanbu helmet wasn't fancy or mythical. It was a working piece of military equipment designed by people who understood real combat. Museum collections around the world contain fragments of other Viking helmets, all following the same practical design principles. The Viking Ship Museum in Oslo displays several helmet fragments that match the Jumanbu style. The Historical Museum of Sweden houses similar finds. None have horns, wings, or any of the theatrical elements we associate with Viking headgear. What's particularly interesting is that we actually do have evidence of horned helmets from Scandinavia, just not from the Viking Age. Bronze Age rock carvings from Sweden, dating to around 1500 BCE. Almost 2,000 years before the Vikings, show figures wearing what appear to be horned helmets. Some ceremonial helmets with horns have been found from this earlier period. The Vixo helmets, discovered in Denmark and dating to the Nordic Bronze Age, feature curve horns and were likely used for religious ceremonies, not combat. These pre-Viking artifacts may have contributed to the confusion about Viking headgear. The Viking helmet myth shows how easily fiction can replace fact in our understanding of history. Once a false image becomes embedded in popular culture, it's surprisingly difficult to correct. The horned helmet has become such a powerful symbol that it persists despite all archaeological evidence to the contrary. Museums and historians have been trying to correct this misconception for decades, but the horned helmet remains firmly fixed in our collective imagination. This raises an important question. If we got something as basic as Viking headgear completely wrong, what else might we have misunderstood about these people? The horned helmet is just one of many myths that have distorted our understanding of Viking culture and society. These misconceptions don't just make for inaccurate movies, they prevent us from appreciating the actual accomplishments and complexity of Viking civilization. Viking helmets represent just the tip of the historical inaccuracy iceberg. Popular media has created an image of Vikings as one-dimensional raiders dressed in furs and impractical armor, screaming as they charge into battle. The reality, as we'll see, was far more complex and interesting. Vikings were skilled craftspeople, clever merchants, daring explorers, and innovative shipbuilders. Their society had sophisticated legal codes, rich artistic traditions, and extensive trade networks that stretched across continents. Did Vikings actually wear horned helmets like we see in movies? No. This iconic image is a complete fabrication from 19th century theatrical productions. The historical Vikings wore practical combat, helmets designed for real battles, not theatrical costumes designed to impress an opera audience. This disconnect between popular imagination and historical reality shows just how thoroughly mythology has replaced fact in our understanding of Viking culture. If we've been so wrong about something as visible and basic as what Vikings wore on their heads, what else might we have misunderstood about them? The horned helmet myth is just the beginning of our journey into separating Viking fact from fiction. The common view of Vikings as simple, bloodthirsty raiders is just as mistaken as the image of them wearing horned helmets into battle. These misconceptions matter because they flatten a rich and complex culture into a one-dimensional stereotype. By looking at the actual archaeological evidence rather than Hollywood inventions, we can discover a much more interesting and nuanced picture of who the Vikings really were. So, if Vikings weren't horn-helmeted berserkers focused exclusively on raiding, what were they doing for those 3 centuries that made such a mark on European history? Let's look at another aspect of Viking society that rarely makes it into the movies. Their remarkable achievements as traders and merchants who created an international commercial network that spanned 3 continents. Beyond raiders, the Viking trading empire. What if I told you Vikings were more like international business people than the bloodthirsty raiders we see in TV shows? While Hollywood loves to show Vikings charging into monasteries with axes raised, archaeology tells us they spent far more time trading than raiding. These Norse merchants created one of the most impressive commercial networks of the medieval world, connecting 3 continents through reliable trade routes that would make modern logistics companies jealous. The Viking trading network was truly remarkable for its time. During the 8th to 11th centuries, most Europeans rarely traveled more than 20 miles from their homes. Meanwhile, Vikings were sailing from Scandinavia to North Africa, the Middle East, and even North America. They established trading posts from Newfoundland to Baghdad, creating commercial connections between peoples who otherwise would never have interacted. This shouldn't really surprise us. Raiding is risky, unpredictable, and creates enemies. Trading, on the other hand, builds wealth, creates allies, and offers more sustainable profits. Smart Vikings figured this out quickly. Why risk your life stealing silver when you could make a fortune selling walrus, ivory, amber, and furs to eager buyers abroad? The problem with our understanding of Vikings comes down to who wrote the history. Monks whose monasteries were attacked by Vikings wrote detailed accounts of these traumatic raids. Meanwhile, the countless peaceful trading voyages went largely unrecorded. It's like judging modern America solely by crime reports while ignoring everything else people do daily. Fortunately, archaeology gives us a more balanced picture. Let's look at what archaeologists have actually found. Across Scandinavia, excavations have uncovered thousands of Arabic silver coins called dirhams. These weren't stolen in raids, they were earned through trade. In Sweden alone, over 85,000 Islamic coins have been discovered, with most dating to the Viking Age. These coins traveled thousands of miles for mints in places like Baghdad, Damascus, and Samarkand before reaching Nordic hands through extensive trade networks. The Vikings' eastern trade route was particularly impressive. Starting from Sweden, Viking merchants would sail across the Baltic Sea to what is now Russia. From there, they navigated a complex network of rivers, including the Volga and Dnieper. These waterways allowed them to reach the Black Sea and Caspian Sea, opening access to Constantinople, modern Istanbul, and the wealthy Islamic world beyond. This eastern route became so important that the Vikings who traveled it regularly became known as the Rus, the people who eventually gave Russia its name. Arabic writers from the period described these Norse merchants arriving in Baghdad with their valuable northern goods. Ibn Fadlan, an Arab diplomat who met Viking traders in the 920s, wrote detailed accounts of these Rus merchants and their customs, providing rare first-hand descriptions. What exactly were Vikings trading? From the north, they brought items that were common to them but exotic and valuable elsewhere. Furs from forest animals like fox, marten, and beaver were highly prized by wealthy buyers in the south. Walrus ivory provided a popular alternative to elephant ivory, especially for intricate carvings and luxury items. Amber from the Baltic coast, with its golden color and unique properties, was valued for jewelry and medicine. Vikings also traded slaves captured during raids or wars, honey, wax, and iron weapons. In return, they received silver coins, bronze, copper, colorful glass beads, expensive spices, silk from China, and exotic fruits and nuts. These luxury items found in Viking graves show the impressive reach of their trade networks. Archaeologists have discovered Buddha figurines from India, cowrie shells from the Red Sea, and silk from China, all in Viking burial sites. A Viking woman buried in Norway was found wearing a ring inscribed with the Arabic phrase for Allah, clear evidence of these intercontinental connections. The Western trade routes were equally impressive. Vikings from Denmark and Norway established trading posts across the British Isles, Ireland, France, and as far south as the Mediterranean. They navigated the difficult Atlantic waters with remarkable skill, reaching Iceland, Greenland, and even North America centuries before Columbus. At each location, they traded local goods and connected previously isolated economies. Archaeological finds in Dublin, York, and Hedeby show these were bustling market towns where goods from across the known world changed hands. Excavations at Jorvik, Viking York, revealed workshops producing everything from jewelry to textiles alongside imported goods from as far away as the Middle East. These trading centers had designated market areas, specialized craft districts, and surprisingly sophisticated commercial facilities. Vikings didn't just trade goods, they transported ideas, technologies, and cultural practices. Writing systems, art styles, and religious concepts moved along these same trade routes. The Vikings' commercial network served as a cultural exchange, enriching all societies involved. Just as the internet connects modern cultures, Viking trade routes connected medieval ones. These Norse merchants developed sophisticated business practices too. They created standardized weight systems for fair trading, established regular markets with set dates, and developed merchant partnerships for sharing risk. Many Viking merchants carried small folding scales and standardized weights, allowing them to conduct fair transactions anywhere their travels took them. These personal weighing kits have been found in many Viking merchant graves. In many ways, Vikings functioned as the Amazon Prime of the 9th century. Need exotic spices from the East? Amber jewelry from the Baltic? Silver from Arabic lands? The Vikings could deliver. Their ships carried goods between regions that otherwise had no direct contact, creating wealth through the differences in what items were valued in different places. This trading empire required sophisticated organization. It wasn't just individual merchants making random trips. The archaeological evidence shows systematic, regular trading patterns that must have required coordination, planning, and protection. Viking rulers understood the value of trade and often provided security for merchants, collecting taxes on goods that passed through their territories. The most tangible evidence of this vast trading network comes from the hoards Vikings buried for safekeeping. Across Scandinavia, Britain, and Eastern Europe, farmers and archaeologists have discovered Viking treasure hoards containing a remarkable mix of items from different cultures. The Cordale hoard found in England contained over 8,600 items, including silver coins from as far away as Afghanistan, all buried by Viking merchants for safekeeping around 905 CE. One particularly fascinating site is Helgo in Sweden, where archaeologists found a Buddha statue from India, a bishop's crozier from Ireland, and a ladle from North Africa, all in the same location. These items had traveled thousands of miles through multiple hands. Before reaching this Viking trading center, imagine the stories these objects could tell about their journeys across continents. What surprising trade networks did Vikings establish across 3 continents? Vikings created trade routes stretching from North America to Baghdad, making them medieval global entrepreneurs. They connected cultures that otherwise had little contact, transporting not just goods but ideas, technologies, and cultural practices across vast distances. Their ships sailed rivers deep into Russia, across the Mediterranean, and along the Atlantic coast, creating a commercial web that spanned 3 continents. These wealthy traders didn't just pass through the places they visited. In many locations, what started as seasonal trading posts grew into permanent settlements and eventually major cities. From Dublin to Kiev, Vikings established trading centers that attracted merchants from near and far. These commercial hubs needed permanent residents to maintain them, leading Vikings to transition from visitors to settlers. Their business acumen helped create urban centers that still thrive today, transforming them from raiders into city builders whose legacy continues in the streets of modern Europe. City founders, from raiders to urban planners. Did you know many major European cities owe their existence or growth to Viking settlers? Places like Dublin, York, and Kiev weren't just raided by Vikings. They were built by them too. The popular image of Vikings burning cities to the ground only tells half the story. These same Norse people also founded thriving urban centers that continue to prosper today. The Vikings began as seasonal visitors to foreign shores. They would arrive in summer, trade or raid, and return home before winter. But something interesting happened over time. These temporary visitors realized that establishing year-round trading posts was more profitable than making dangerous journeys back and forth across the sea. What started as simple wooden structures built near good harbors gradually developed into permanent settlements with organized streets, workshops, and houses. Dublin offers perhaps the clearest example of Vikings transforming from raiders to city founders. In 841, Norse ships arrived on the eastern coast of Ireland. They initially built a fortified camp near the mouth of the River Liffey, a simple long fort ship harbor that served as a base for raids into the Irish countryside. But this temporary outpost soon became something much more permanent. Archaeological excavations in Dublin have uncovered the gradual evolution from camp to city. By the 900s, Vikings had established a proper town with regular streets and permanent wooden buildings. The settlement included a busy harbor, markets, and craft workshops where artisans created jewelry, textiles, and leather goods. Most revealing are the house foundations archaeologists have uncovered. They show a transition from Viking-style longhouses to more urban building types, showing how Norse settlers adapted to urban living. The Vikings brought urban planning concepts that were rare in Ireland at that time. They organized Dublin into a grid pattern with planned streets rather than the organic, unplanned growth common to many medieval towns. Excavations along Fishamble Street in Dublin revealed an organized layout of over 200 houses, workshops, and yards from the Viking period. The archaeological evidence shows distinct zones for different activities: residential areas, commercial districts, and industrial areas for messy crafts like metalworking and tanning. The Viking impact on Dublin wasn't just physical. They transformed it into an international trading center connected to their vast commercial network. Ships from all over the Norse world arrived in Dublin's harbor, bringing goods from as far away as the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic world. Dublin became a multicultural city where Irish, Norse, and other European cultures mixed, creating unique art styles, jewelry designs, and even architectural features that combined elements from different traditions. York, known as Jorvik during Viking times, tells a similar story of transformation. Vikings captured the Anglo-Saxon city in 866. Instead of just plundering and leaving, they recognized York's strategic location at the junction of two rivers and decided to stay. Under Viking rule, York grew into one of medieval Britain's largest and richest cities, with a population estimated at over 10,000 people, huge by early medieval standards. The Coppergate excavations in York uncovered remarkable evidence of Viking urban life. Archaeologists found remains of timber-framed buildings arranged in narrow property plots along planned streets. These houses were packed tightly together, with workshops at the front facing the street and living quarters behind. The level of preservation was so exceptional that archaeologists found everyday items like wooden bowls, leather shoes, and even Viking-age toilets, giving us a vivid picture of daily urban life. York's Viking-age streets buzzed with specialized craftspeople. The name Coppergate itself means Street of the Cupmakers in Old Norse, indicating an area where wooden vessels were manufactured. Archaeologists found workshops for blacksmiths, jewelers, comb makers, leatherworkers, and textile producers. This specialization shows a sophisticated urban economy where people relied on buying goods and services rather than producing everything themselves, a hallmark of true city life. The Viking city building reached even further east, where they played a crucial role in establishing Russia's earliest urban centers. Norse traders and warriors known as the Rus traveled the great Russian rivers and established trading posts that grew into major cities. Novgorod and Kiev began as Viking trading stations before expanding into the foundations of the medieval Russian state, known as Kievan Rus. Archaeologists working in Novgorod have uncovered extensive wooden streets, houses, and workshops dating to the Viking Age. The preservation of organic materials in Novgorod's waterlogged soil is exceptional, revealing details of urban life that are usually lost to time. The excavations show planned neighborhoods with wooden streets carefully constructed from split logs. These streets were regularly repaired and rebuilt as they wore out or sank into the wet ground, showing organized city maintenance that required coordinated civic effort. Birka in Sweden represents one of the earliest purpose-built trading towns in Scandinavia. Founded around 750 CE, it was designed from the beginning as an international marketplace. Archaeological investigations show a carefully planned town with a street grid, designated craft areas, and a harbor facility. Defensive walls surrounded the settlement, and a separate area contained pagan burial grounds. Birka's artifacts reveal connections to places as distant as the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic world, showing how these Viking trading centers connected Northern Europe to global trade networks. A key feature of Viking urban centers was their multicultural nature. Unlike many medieval settlements that were relatively isolated, Viking towns were deliberately connected to international networks. Dublin had Irish, Norse, and Anglo-Saxon residents. York contained people from across the Viking world. Novgorod mixed Slavic, Finnish, and Norse populations. This diversity created dynamic cultural environments where ideas, technologies, and artistic styles blended in unique ways. The archaeological record reveals that these Viking towns had surprisingly advanced infrastructure. Many had wooden sidewalks, keeping pedestrians above the mud. Some had drainage systems to manage waste and rainwater. Public spaces for markets and assemblies were carefully laid out. Property boundaries were clearly marked and respected over generations, suggesting established legal systems governing urban property. These settlements weren't just physical spaces, but communities with distinct identities and governance. Many Viking towns had their own legal codes, weights and measure systems, and civic organizations. They minted their own coins, controlled local trade, and developed unique cultural traditions that mixed Norse elements with local practices. York, for instance, developed distinctive pottery types, jewelry styles, and even religious practices that combined Norse and Christian elements during the transition period. How did Vikings transform places like Dublin and York into thriving urban centers? By establishing permanent trading posts with organized layouts, specialized production areas, and international connections. They brought concepts of urban planning from the more developed parts of Europe they had visited and adapted them to new locations. Their commercial networks provided the economic foundation that allowed these settlements to grow from simple outposts into true cities. Most importantly, they created multicultural environments where different traditions could mix and evolve, producing new urban cultures. The Vikings' legacy continues in these cities today. Modern Dublin's street pattern still partly follows the layout established by Viking settlers over 1,000 years ago. York celebrates its Viking heritage with museums and archaeological sites. Across Northern Europe, cities that began as Viking trading posts still occupy critical positions in transportation networks and regional economies. But what innovations allowed Vikings to reach such distant places to build their trading empire in the first place? The answer lies in their revolutionary ships, technological marvels that combined features no other vessels of their time could match. These ships were the key that unlocked the Vikings' ability to reach places across 3 continents, enabling their transformation from coastal raiders to international traders. The revolutionary Viking ships, city founders. How did a people from remote Scandinavia manage to reach North America, the Mediterranean, and Russia when most Europeans rarely traveled beyond their villages? The answer lies not just in Viking courage, but in their revolutionary ships. These vessels weren't just transportation, they were the technological marvel that made the entire Viking age possible. Viking ships were so advanced for their time that they seem almost impossible. In an era when most European ships hugged coastlines and feared the open ocean, Vikings crossed the stormy North Atlantic. When other medieval sailors needed deep harbors, Vikings could land on beaches or navigate far upriver. Their ships could carry cargo across oceans, yet be light enough for crews to carry around obstacles. No other vessels of the time could do all these things. To understand how revolutionary Viking ships were, we need to compare them to what else existed in medieval Europe. Most Mediterranean ships of the period were heavy, deep-hulled vessels that relied on sails and needed harbors for loading and unloading. Northern European ships were typically simple, flat-bottomed riverboats not designed for sea travel. Neither could match the Vikings' ability to cross oceans and then navigate shallow rivers, a combination that gave Norse sailors access to places no one else could reach. The secret to Viking shipbuilding success started with the wood itself. Shipwrights carefully selected oak trees, splitting them along the grain rather than sawing them. This preserved the wood's natural strength and flexibility. They created thin, overlapping planks that were light yet strong. The planks weren't just cut, they were split along the natural grain of the tree, using axes and wedges, preserving the wood's strength in a way sawing couldn't match. Vikings used a construction method called clinker-built or lap-strake that was revolutionary. Each plank overlapped the one below it and was fastened with iron rivets. This created a strong but flexible hull that could flex and give with the waves rather than fighting against them. The method used less wood than other shipbuilding techniques while creating a stronger vessel, efficient engineering that was centuries ahead of its time. The keel, the backbone of the ship, was another innovation. Viking shipbuilders created a T-shaped keel from a single piece of oak. This design provided stability while still allowing for a shallow draft. The keel was relatively flat compared to later sailing ships, allowing the vessel to land on beaches, yet still providing enough grip in the water to sail efficiently against the wind. The flexible hull, design meant Viking ships worked with the ocean rather than against it. When a rigid ship hits a wave, it fights against the water's force. Viking ships flexed and twisted slightly, absorbing the ocean's energy. Sailors reported being able to see the movement in the hull planks during storms, a sight that would terrify most sailors, but actually meant the ship was doing exactly what it was designed to do. Viking ships had remarkably shallow drafts, often needing as little as 50 centimeters, 20 inches of water to float even when fully loaded. This shallow draft was revolutionary because it allowed Vikings to navigate rivers and land directly on beaches. They didn't need harbors or docks, giving them tactical advantages in both trading and raiding. They could appear suddenly in places other ships couldn't reach and depart just as quickly. The most famous Viking vessel, the longship, was a masterpiece of design. Archaeological finds like the Gokstad and Oseberg ships give us perfect examples of these vessels. A typical longship was long, about 20 to 30 meters, narrow, light, and extremely fast. The length-to-width ratio was about 7:1, making it sleek and quick. Both ends were usually identical, allowing the ship to reverse direction without turning around, a huge advantage in narrow rivers or during battle. Most people don't realize that Vikings created several specialized ship types for different purposes. The longship was primarily a war vessel designed for speed and carrying troops. The Nar was a wider, deeper trading ship designed to carry cargo across oceans. Smaller vessels called curves served as fishing boats and transport along the coast. Each type was optimized for its specific purpose while maintaining the core Viking shipbuilding principles. Viking ships were powered by both sails and oars, giving them versatility no other vessels had. When the wind was favorable, a single square sail provided power. When the wind died or changed direction, the crew could switch to rowing. This combination meant Viking ships were never stranded when the wind died, unlike many purely sail-powered vessels of the time. The sail technology itself was advanced for the period. Vikings used woolen sails treated with animal fats to make them more wind-resistant and waterproof. These sails were expensive to produce. Some historians estimate a single sail required wool from over 200 sheep and took thousands of hours to weave and prepare. But the investment paid off in sailing performance that outmatched their contemporaries. Steering was handled by a side rudder or steering, or mounted on the starboard right side of the ship. The word starboard actually comes from steerboard or steering side. This rudder system was more advanced than those on many contemporary vessels, giving Vikings better control in rough seas and allowing precise navigation through rivers and fjords. What made these ships truly revolutionary was the combination of all these features in one vessel. Other cultures had ships that could do some of these things, but none had created vessels that combined ocean crossing capability with shallow draft, speed, and maneuverability. This combination gave Vikings access to territories no one else could reach and allowed them to appear and disappear with startling speed. Building these ships required incredible skill passed down through generations. Viking shipwrights didn't use written plans. They worked from experience and tradition, using simple tools to create complex curves and perfect symmetry. The results were so impressive that modern naval architects and engineers still study Viking shipbuilding principles. Computer models have confirmed that their designs were remarkably efficient with optimal hull shapes for speed and stability. Archaeological finds give us a clear picture of these amazing vessels. The Viking Ship Museum in Oslo houses several nearly complete ships excavated from burial mounds. The Gokstad ship, built around 890 CE, is 23 meters long, 5 meters wide, and could carry a crew of 40 men across the open ocean. The Oseberg ship shows the artistic side of Viking shipbuilding with elaborate wooden carvings decorating a vessel that was still fully seaworthy. Recent experimental archaeology has proven just how capable these ships were. Modern reconstructions like the Viking and Sea Stallion have successfully recreated voyages from Scandinavia to North America and around Europe. These modern voyages confirmed what the archaeological evidence suggested. Viking ships could maintain average speeds of 5 to 10 knots and cover over 200 kilometers per day under good conditions. What technological innovations made Viking ships superior to all others of their time? Their unique flexible hull design, shallow draft, and specialized vessel types for different purposes made them unmatched for both ocean and river travel. The clinker-built construction provided strength without weight, while the combination of sail and/or power gave them versatility in all weather conditions. These weren't just incremental improvements, they were revolutionary designs that transformed what was possible in medieval seafaring. But having great ships is only half the story. How did Vikings find their way across open oceans without any modern navigation tools? Unlike today's sailors with GPS and satellite navigation, Vikings crossed vast stretches of open ocean with no modern instruments. Their navigation techniques were as impressive as their shipbuilding, combining careful observation of nature with accumulated knowledge passed down through generations of seafarers. Finding their way. Viking navigation secrets. Imagine sailing across the open ocean with no compass, no GPS, not even a proper map. How did Vikings navigate with such remarkable accuracy? These Norse sailors crossed thousands of miles of open water to reach distant shores like Iceland, Greenland, and even North America. The journey from Norway to Iceland spans nearly 600 miles of open ocean. To Greenland, it's another 800 miles. These weren't lucky accidents. Vikings repeatedly made these journeys with enough precision to establish settlements and maintain trade routes across generations. Most people assume Vikings simply followed coastlines, but this wasn't possible for many of their most important voyages. The routes to Iceland, Greenland, and North America required long stretches of open ocean sailing where no land was visible. They couldn't just hug the shore to reach these isolated lands. So, how did they find their way across these vast waters without getting lost? The written sources give us some clues. Norse sagas describe voyages to distant lands with specific sailing directions. For example, the saga of Eric the Red explains that to sail from Norway to Greenland, one should sail west from Iceland until hitting Greenland's glaciers. These directions sound simple, but they required sophisticated knowledge to execute successfully. The sagas also mention that Vikings sometimes sailed for a specific number of days in one direction, suggesting they had ways to maintain a consistent heading. The sun served as their primary directional guide. Vikings knew that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, allowing them to establish basic directions on clear days. But they went beyond these basics. Archaeological evidence suggests they used a device called a sun shadow board, a wooden disc with a central gnomon like a sundial. By measuring the shadow cast by the sun at different times of day, a skilled navigator could determine direction with surprising accuracy. Experiments with reconstructed sun shadow boards show they can be effective navigational tools when used by experienced sailors. Stars provided guidance at night, particularly the North Star, Polaris, which remains fixed in the northern sky. Vikings recognized that the height of the North Star above the horizon changes as you travel north or south. By observing its position, they could estimate their latitude, how far north or south they had traveled. This technique wouldn't tell them their east-west position, but it would help them maintain a consistent latitude during long voyages, exactly what's needed when sailing to a destination like Iceland or Greenland. But what about cloudy days and nights when the sun and stars weren't visible? This is where one of the most fascinating theories about Viking navigation comes in, the sunstone. Medieval Icelandic texts mention a mysterious solarstein, sunstone, that could find the sun on cloudy days. For centuries, historians dismissed this as myth, but recent research suggests it might have been real. Certain crystals found in Scandinavia, particularly Iceland spar, a form of calcite, have unusual optical properties. They polarize light, meaning if you look through them at the sky and rotate the crystal, the brightness changes depending on the position of the sun, even on overcast days. Archaeologists found a crystal matching these properties on a 16th century English shipwreck, suggesting the use of such navigation aids continued long after the Viking Age. Experiments show that with practice, navigators can determine the sun's position within a few degrees using these crystals, even when the sun is hidden by clouds. This would have given Vikings a crucial advantage on the frequently overcast northern seas. Vikings also relied heavily on natural signs that most modern people wouldn't notice. Birds provided particularly useful navigation clues. Some seabirds nest on land, but feed at sea, flying out in the morning and returning in the evening. By observing birds like puffins and gannets, Viking sailors could determine the direction of land even when it wasn't visible. The sagas specifically mention releasing ravens during the voyage to Greenland. If the birds didn't return, they had likely found land in that direction. Cloud formations offered more clues. Land masses affect cloud patterns in ways visible from far offshore. Islands often have clouds gathered above them when the surrounding sea is clear. Experienced sailors call this island clouds or land blink. These cloud formations can be visible up to 30 miles offshore, well before the land itself comes into view. Greenland, with its massive ice cap, creates distinctive cloud patterns visible from exceptional distances. The color of the water provided additional information. Shallow water appears lighter than deep water. Currents carrying glacial meltwater have distinctive colors. Even underwater features affect the water's surface appearance in ways experienced sailors can recognize. Vikings spent their lives on the water and developed an intuitive understanding of these subtle signs. Whales and other marine life also help guide their way. Different whale species frequent specific feeding grounds, and their presence could indicate location. Large gatherings of seabirds often mark productive fishing areas that occur at consistent locations year after year. These natural patterns would have been carefully observed and memorized by generations of Norse sailors. Unlike later explorers, Vikings didn't rely on written charts. Instead, they created detailed mental maps passed down through oral tradition. Sailing directions were memorized as stories, poems, and songs that described landmarks, currents, winds, and animal life along important routes. These verbal maps included sailing times between locations, the appearance of coastlines from different approaches, and potential hazards. This memory-based navigation makes perfect sense in Viking culture, where literacy was limited and conditions were too wet for regular use of written materials on board ships. The sailing directions were shared through what we might call pilot knowledge, experienced navigators teaching younger sailors through apprenticeship. The Norse navigational tradition valued experience and observation over written documentation. Practical experiments help us understand Viking navigation methods. Modern sailors have successfully recreated Viking voyages using only the techniques described in the sagas. In 2016, a replica Viking ship sailed from Norway to North America using traditional navigation methods. The crew relied on the sun, stars, wildlife patterns, and careful observation of winds and currents to find their way. Proving these methods work when used by skilled navigators. Landmarks played a crucial role once land was near. Vikings memorized distinctive coastal features, unusually shaped mountains, rock formations, or river mouths. These served as confirmation they were on course. The sagas describe specific mountains, glaciers, and headlands that marked important locations. Archaeological evidence confirms Vikings often built cairns, stone markers, at important navigational points to guide future voyages. How did Vikings navigate across open oceans without modern instruments? Through a combination of celestial observation, possible sunstone use, natural signs, and mental mapping techniques that made them the ancient world's greatest navigators. They combined multiple methods, cross-checking between different navigational clues. When clouds obscured the sun, they watched birds and water color. When landmarks weren't visible, they used stars and sailing time estimates. This redundant system allowed successful navigation even when some clues weren't available. These navigation skills took Vikings much further than most people realize, all the way to North America. While other European sailors feared sailing out of sight of land, Vikings crossed thousands of miles of open ocean to reach new territories. They didn't just reach these distant shores by accident. They returned repeatedly, established settlements, and maintained contact across generations. These journeys required sophisticated navigation skills that wouldn't be matched by other Europeans for centuries. Their ability to find their way across the vastness of the North Atlantic stands as one of their most impressive achievements, leading to the most surprising chapter in Viking history. Their arrival in North America centuries before Columbus. The real discoverers of America. What if I told you Europeans reached America 500 years before Columbus built settlements and even traded with native peoples? While most of us learned in school that Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492, archaeological evidence tells a completely different story. Viking explorers not only reached North America around the year 1000 CE, but they built settlements and interacted with the indigenous people they encountered. This remarkable achievement has been overshadowed in popular history, leaving one of the most impressive feats of early exploration largely forgotten. There's something strange about how we celebrate Columbus Day each year, while barely mentioning the Norse voyagers who made the journey centuries earlier. Columbus is honored with statues, holidays, and places named after him across America. Meanwhile, the Vikings who truly deserve the title of first European discoverers receive little recognition outside of history books and museums. This historical oversight isn't just about giving credit where it's due, it changes our understanding of early contact between Europe and the Americas. The story of Vikings in North America begins with the Norse sagas, medieval texts that describe the exploits and voyages of early Norse explorers. Two sagas in particular, the Saga of Eric the Red and the Saga of the Greenlanders, contain detailed accounts of voyages to a place called Vinland, described as a land west of Greenland where wild grapes grew. These texts mention several expeditions to this new land, led by explorers including Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, and Thorfinn Karlsefni. For centuries, historians treated these accounts as legends or exaggerations. The descriptions seem too detailed to be pure fiction, but without physical evidence, they couldn't be confirmed as historical fact. All this changed in 1960 when Norwegian explorer Helge Ingstad, an archaeologist, and Stein Ingstad made a breakthrough discovery at Lance Aux Meadows on the northern tip of Newfoundland, Canada. Local resident George Decker had led them to a site with unusual grass-covered mounds that didn't match the local indigenous building patterns. When they began excavating, what they found rewrote history books. The remains of 8 buildings constructed in the distinctive Norse style, identical to Viking structures found in Greenland and Iceland. The archaeological evidence was unmistakable. The buildings featured the typical Norse layout with central fireplaces and long side benches used for sitting and sleeping. The construction technique matched Viking methods perfectly, turf walls with wooden frames and stone footings. Radiocarbon dating of charcoal from the site confirmed what the building style suggested. These structures were built around 1000 CE, exactly when the sagas claimed Vikings reached North America. What makes the Lance Aux Meadows site such definitive proof is not just the buildings themselves, but the artifacts found inside them. Archaeologists discovered a bronze pin used for fastening cloaks in the Norse style, a stone oil lamp identical to those used in Viking settlements, and a spindle whorl for spinning yarn. All items with distinctly Norse designs that couldn't have been made by indigenous North Americans. Perhaps most convincing was the discovery of evidence of iron working at the site. Archaeologists found a Norse-style smithy with a stone anvil and iron slag. This is particularly significant because indigenous North Americans at this time didn't work with iron. The presence of iron artifacts and metalworking equipment could only be explained by European visitors. The settlement at Lance Aux Meadows appears to have been relatively small and short-lived. The buildings could have housed between 70 to 90 people, and evidence suggests they were occupied for only a few years. This matches the saga accounts, which describe multiple expeditions to Vinland rather than permanent colonization. Why didn't Vikings establish permanent settlements in North America as they did in Iceland and Greenland? The sagas provide some answers. They describe conflicts with indigenous people whom the Norse called Skrælings. These encounters sometimes began peacefully with trade, but often deteriorated into violence. Being far from their established colonies in Greenland and Iceland and facing resistance from far more numerous local populations, the Vikings apparently decided North America wasn't worth the effort to colonize permanently. Lance aux Meadows likely served as a base camp or gateway for further exploration south. Its location at the northern tip of Newfoundland makes it an ideal staging area. The winters there are harsh, but the location provided access to the Gulf of St. Lawrence and routes deeper into North America. The sagas describe Vikings exploring areas where wild grapes grew, something not found as far north as Newfoundland but common further south. Recent discoveries suggest Vikings may indeed have traveled much further into North America than just Newfoundland. In 2016, satellite imagery helped archaeologists identify a possible second Norse site at Point Rosie in southwestern Newfoundland, though further excavation is needed to confirm this finding. Other researchers have suggested Viking artifacts found as far south as Maine and New York, though these claims remain controversial. The most exciting recent development came in 2021 when scientists used tree ring dating to determine that Vikings were present in North America precisely in the year 1021 CE, exactly 1,000 years ago. By analyzing wood from Lance aux Meadows that had been cut by metal tools which only the Vikings possessed, they identified a specific cosmic radiation event visible in the tree rings that allowed for precise dating. What's particularly remarkable about the Viking voyages to North America is how they were accomplished. The journey from Norway to Greenland is over 1,800 miles across some of the world's most dangerous waters. From Greenland to Newfoundland adds another 900 miles. These incredible distances were crossed in open wooden ships without compasses, charts, or any modern navigation equipment. The achievement represents one of history's greatest feats of seafaring and exploration. The Norse sagas suggest Vikings encountered at least 3 different regions in North America, which they named Helluland, likely Baffin Island, Markland, probably Labrador, and Vinland, Newfoundland, and possibly areas further south. The descriptions in the sagas match the geography of these regions with surprising accuracy, adding credibility to the written accounts. What evidence shows Vikings reached North America 500 years before Columbus? Archaeological sites like Lance aux Meadows provide conclusive physical proof of Viking settlements in North America around 1000 CE. The distinctive building styles, Norse artifacts, evidence of ironworking, and precise radiocarbon dating leave no doubt that Vikings were the first Europeans to discover and settle in North America. This isn't speculative history. It's archaeological fact supported by physical evidence that can be seen and touched. But Vikings weren't just explorers and traders. What can their artistic achievements tell us about their true culture? While their ships carried them to new lands and their swords won them fearsome reputations, it was perhaps in their art and craftsmanship that Vikings expressed their deepest cultural values. The intricate carvings, metalwork, and textile designs they created reveal a society that valued beauty, complexity, and skilled craftsmanship. Masters of art, Viking far more than the stereotype. Have you ever wondered why museums around the world dedicate entire sections to Viking art if they were just simple barbarians? The British Museum in London, the National Museum in Copenhagen, and the Viking Ship Museum in Oslo all showcase intricate Viking artifacts behind glass cases. These aren't crude weapons or basic tools, but delicate jewelry, elaborate carvings, and magnificent textiles that require immense skill to create. This doesn't match the savage raider stereotype at all. The image of Vikings as primitive brutes falls apart when you look at what they actually made. While Hollywood shows them as rough warriors concerned only with fighting, archaeological finds tell a completely different story. Vikings created some of the most sophisticated art in medieval Europe. Their metalwork featured details, so tiny you need magnification to appreciate them fully. Their wood carvings transformed ordinary objects into stunning works of art. Their jewelry combined technical mastery with imaginative designs that still influence artists today. What's remarkable about Viking art is how it evolved over time through distinct styles. Art historians have identified 5 major artistic periods during the Viking Age, each with its own distinctive features. The Oseberg style, 800 to 850 CE, came first, named after the incredible ship burial discovered in Norway. This style featured intricate animal figures with bodies that twist and curve into complex patterns. The animals often have gripping limbs and heads with large, staring eyes. Next came the boar style, 850 to 950 CE, which introduced the famous gripping beast motif. These creatures intertwine with geometric ribbon patterns, grabbing the borders and each other with their paws. The symmetrical designs create an almost hypnotic effect. You can see this style on numerous metal objects found across the Viking world, from belt buckles to brooches. The gelling style, 900 to 975 CE, followed, named after artifacts found in the Danish royal burial site at Jelling. This style shows more S-shaped animals with ribbon-like bodies forming loops and spirals. The creatures became more abstract, often with just a single limb visible. The silver cup found at the Jelling burial shows this style perfectly, with animals flowing around the cup in continuous motion. Around 950-1050 CE, the Mammon style emerged, named after an ornate axe found in a grave in Mammon, Denmark. This style introduced more plant-like elements and larger animals with flowing manes and tails. The designs became grander and more assured, showing confident craftspeople experimenting with new ideas. The famous Mammon axe combines practical function with spectacular decoration, showing Vikings valued beauty even in their weapons. The final Viking art style, called Uns 1050 to 1125 CE, represents the height of Viking artistic achievement. Named after the ornate wooden carvings on Enstave Church in Norway, this style features incredibly slender, elegant animals that flow and twist in graceful curves. The animals become even more abstracted, with bodies reduced to flowing ribbons that weave together in complex compositions. This style continued even after the official end of the Viking Age, showing how their artistic tradition influenced later medieval art. Viking woodworkers created some of the most impressive pieces found from the medieval period. The Oseberg ship, discovered in a burial mound in Norway, features incredible animal head posts with creatures that seem almost alive. The wooden cart found in the same burial contains detailed carvings showing figures and animals in complex scenes. These weren't rough carvings, but precisely executed works with smooth, flowing lines and balanced compositions. The Vikings' wooden stave churches represent another high point of their woodworking skill. Though most of the surviving examples were built after the Viking Age, they continue traditions established during that period. These churches feature intricate carvings covering doorways and support posts. Norway's Unstave Church contains wooden panels with animal designs so fluid and graceful they seem to move when you look at them. UNESCO recognized this church as a World Heritage Site specifically because of the artistic importance of these carvings. In metalwork, Viking craftspeople showed equal skill. Gold, silver, and bronze became canvases for their artistic vision. The famous Thor's hammer pendants found across the Viking world show how they turned religious symbols into miniature art pieces. Viking brooches, often used to fasten cloaks, combine practical function with stunning artistry. These oval or tortoise brooches worn by women featured raised designs with gilded surfaces and sometimes filigree decoration or gems. One of the most impressive examples of Viking metalwork is the silver treasure from Cordale in England. This hoard contained over 8,600 items, including silver coins, ingots, and jewelry. Many pieces show detailed decoration with typical Viking motifs. The craftsmanship equals anything produced elsewhere in Europe during this period. Another spectacular example is the gilt bronze pitney brooch, which combines intricate animal patterns with a technical mastery that would challenge even modern jewelers. Viking women created equally impressive art through textiles. Archaeological finds of weaving equipment appear in almost every Viking settlement, showing the importance of this craft. The Oseberg burial contained fragments of spectacular tapestries with scenes of people, animals, and ships woven in colored wool. The patterns show sophisticated design sense and technical mastery of complex weaving techniques. Even everyday clothing featured decorated bands and borders showing status and artistic skill. These weren't just decorative objects, they reveal important aspects of Viking culture and beliefs. Many designs include symbols connected to Norse mythology. The twisting animals represent the constant struggle between order and chaos in the Norse worldview. The patterns showing animals transforming into other forms reflect beliefs about shape-shifting and the fluid boundaries between humans and animals in Norse mythology. Viking art wasn't created in isolation. As Vikings traveled, they encountered artistic traditions from across Europe, the Byzantine Empire, and even the Islamic world. They absorbed influences from these cultures, combining them with their own traditions to create something new. Irish spiral patterns merged with Norse animal forms. Byzantine decorative elements appeared in Norse jewelry designs. This creative borrowing shows Vikings weren't closed-minded barbarians, but sophisticated people open to new ideas. In turn, Viking art influenced cultures wherever they settled. In Ireland, the distinctive ringerike style that developed in the 11th century shows clear Viking influence combined with Irish artistic traditions. In England, Viking settlement in areas like York led to new hybrid art forms mixing Anglo-Saxon and Norse elements. In Russia, early medieval art shows Norse design influences brought by Viking traders and settlers. Even as far away as Istanbul, Viking artistic motifs appear on stone carvings made by Norse mercenaries serving Byzantine emperors. How did Viking art and craftsmanship influence cultures across Europe? Their distinctive artistic styles and technical mastery spread throughout Europe, influencing local traditions and creating new hybrid art forms. Wherever Vikings settled or traded, they brought their artistic traditions with them. These didn't replace local styles, but merged with them, creating new artistic expressions that combined elements from different cultures. This process enriched European art and contributed to the development of later medieval artistic styles. These weren't just pretty objects, they give us clues about what everyday life was really like for Vikings. The scenes depicted in their art show feasting halls, ships under sail, and people going about their daily business. They reveal a society that valued craftsmanship, beauty, and technical skill. The tools and techniques needed to create such work tell us about Viking technology and knowledge. Even the materials used, the types of wood, metal, and textile fibers, provide information about trade networks and resource management in Viking society. The sophisticated art Vikings created forces us to reconsider our image of them as simple barbarians concerned only with fighting and plunder. No society that produced such beautiful, technically advanced art could be truly primitive. Viking craftspeople were masters of their materials, creating works that still impress us today, 1,000 years after they were made. Their artistic legacy represents one of their most significant contributions to world culture, one that continues to inspire artists and amazes museum visitors to this day. Daily life, the real Viking experience. What would your life actually be like if you lived as a Viking? The answer might surprise you. When we picture Vikings, we often see fierce warriors swinging axes and sailing off to raid distant shores. But archaeological evidence shows this image covers only a tiny slice of real Viking life. Most Viking men and women never raided anyone. They spent their days doing something far less dramatic, but absolutely essential: farming. Archaeological excavations across Scandinavia reveal that most Vikings were farmers first and foremost. They grew barley, oats, and rye in small fields cleared from forests. They raised cattle, pigs, sheep, and goats for meat, milk, and wool. During the short northern growing season, Viking farmers worked long hours to produce enough food to survive the harsh winters. Farm tools like iron plowshares, sickles, and hoes are among the most common items found at Viking sites, far outnumbering weapons. A typical Viking day started early. As the sun rose, family members divided the day's tasks. Men might plow fields, repair fences, or fish. Women typically milked cows, made cheese, and tended vegetable gardens. Children helped with simpler tasks like gathering eggs or herding animals. During harvest time, everyone worked together to bring in crops before bad weather threatened. The rhythm of farm life followed the seasons, with planting in spring, growing in summer, harvesting in fall, and indoor work during winter. Viking homes were nothing like the rough, primitive dwellings we often imagine. The typical Viking house was a longhouse, a rectangular building with curved walls that could be quite large. Archaeological remains at sites like Borg in Norway show longhouses reaching up to 270 feet in length. Most family farms had more modest homes around 50 to 75 feet long. These longhouses were remarkably sophisticated structures built to handle the harsh northern climate. Inside a typical longhouse, the single large room served multiple functions. The central area contained a long hearth that provided both cooking fire and heat. Smoke escaped through a hole in the roof, though the houses were often smoky. Wooden posts supported the roof, and the walls were made from wooden planks or wattle and daub, a mixture of sticks and clay. In colder regions, walls could be insulated with turf, providing excellent protection against winter temperatures. Benches lined the walls of the longhouse, serving as seating during the day and sleeping areas at night. People slept on straw mattresses covered with furs and woven blankets. Valuable items and personal possessions were stored in wooden chests that also served as seats. Archaeology shows that many longhouses had slightly raised areas at the ends that might have offered more private spaces for the family leaders or served as storage areas. The entire family lived together in this single space with livestock, sometimes sharing the house during harsh winter months. Imagine the sounds and smells of a Viking home, the crackling fire, cooking food, talking people, and occasionally farm animals at one end of the building. This arrangement provided warmth and security, but very little privacy by modern standards. Viking food was simple, but varied. Barley porridge served as a daily staple, often flavored with fruits, nuts, or honey when available. Bread made from barley or rye was baked on flat stones near the fire. Dairy products played a major role in the diet, with milk from cows, sheep, and goats used to make cheese, butter, and skyr, a yogurt-like food still eaten in Iceland today. Meat wasn't eaten daily, but appeared more often in winter when animals were slaughtered to avoid feeding them through the cold months. Fish provided an important protein source, especially for coastal communities. Archaeological evidence shows Vikings ate cod, herring, salmon, and shellfish. They preserved fish by drying, smoking, or fermenting it. Hunting contributed venison, wild boar, and smaller game to their tables. Vegetables came from small garden plots where they grew onions, cabbage, peas, and beans. Wild foods like berries, nuts, mushrooms, and herbs rounded out their diet and added flavor to meals. Viking clothing was far more colorful and complex than the drab furs often shown in movies. Archaeological finds and grave goods show that Vikings wore woolen garments in various colors: reds, blues, greens, and yellows produced from natural dyes. Men typically wore trousers and a tunic belted at the waist, while women wore long dresses with apron-like overdresses fastened with decorative brooches. Both men and women wore cloaks for warmth, secured with pins or brooches. Shoes and boots were made from leather, carefully stitched together. The long winter months provided time for indoor work and entertainment. Women spun wool into thread and woven cloth on upright looms. Men carved wood, worked on tools, and repaired equipment. These dark winters were brightened by games, music, and storytelling. Archaeological sites have yielded game pieces for Nafatiful, a chess-like board game, and dice made from bone or antler. People played musical instruments like simple flutes, lyres, and drums. Storytelling formed a central part of Viking entertainment. The great Norse sagas and tales of gods and heroes were shared orally long before they were written down. Imagine sitting by the central hearth as a skilled storyteller recounts tales of Thor's battles with giants or Odin's quest for wisdom. These stories weren't just entertainment. They taught cultural values and reinforced community bonds during the isolated winter months. Social structure in Viking communities was less rigid than in many other medieval societies. While there were social classes, there was no strict feudal system like elsewhere in Europe. At the top stood wealthy landowners and chieftains who gained power through a combination of land, ownership, family connections, and personal reputation. Below them were free farmers who owned their own land and made up the majority of the population. Lower still were tenant farmers who worked land belonging to others. At the bottom were thralls, slaves captured in raids or born into slavery. Community decisions were made at things, assemblies where free men gathered to resolve disputes, establish laws, and make important decisions. These gatherings served as courts, parliaments, and social events all at once. The Thing system shows that despite having kings and chieftains, Viking society maintained elements of democracy and community participation unusual for the time. What was daily life actually like in a Viking settlement? Most Vikings were farmers living in family groups in long houses, focused on agriculture, crafts, and trade rather than constant warfare. Their days followed the rhythm of the seasons, with periods of intense farm work alternating with indoor crafts and social activities. Far from the one-dimensional raiders of popular imagination, Vikings created stable communities with complex social structures and rich cultural traditions. The image of the farmer might be less dramatic than the warrior, but it's much closer to the reality most Vikings experienced throughout their lives. But who really ran these Viking households while the men were away trading or raiding? The answer reveals one of the most surprising aspects of Viking society. Women held positions of power and responsibility that were unusual for their time. While men might have dominated the public sphere, women controlled the domestic realm and possessed rights few other European women would enjoy for centuries to come. Viking women, power beyond their time. Did Viking women have more freedom and authority than most women would gain until centuries later? While medieval European women were largely confined to lives dictated by male guardians, Viking women enjoyed remarkable independence and power. This wasn't an accident or anomaly. It was woven into the fabric of Norse society, where women's roles were both respected and essential. When we look at most of medieval Europe, women had few rights of their own. They typically couldn't own property independently, had little say in who they married, and remained legally subordinate to male relatives throughout their lives. Their value was often tied primarily to childbearing and domestic work. Yet across the North Sea, a dramatically different picture emerges from archaeological and written evidence about Viking women. One of the most significant rights Viking women held was property ownership. Norse law allowed women to inherit property from their parents or deceased husbands. They could own land, farms, and goods in their own names. This economic independence gave Viking women a foundation for autonomy that most European women wouldn't achieve until the 19th or even 20th century. Runic inscriptions and legal documents confirm that women regularly controlled substantial resources independently. Viking women could also request divorce, a right almost unheard of elsewhere in medieval Europe. The Icelandic sagas and law codes describe several acceptable grounds for divorce, including physical abuse, failure to provide support, and even more surprising reasons like a husband wearing an unmanly shirt or failing to visit the marital bed regularly. The divorced woman typically took her original dowry and a portion of the shared property with her, maintaining her economic independence after the marriage ended. Archaeological evidence provides powerful support for women's status in Viking society. Female graves contain far more than domestic items like cooking tools or weaving equipment. Many women were buried with elaborate jewelry, valuable trade goods, and symbols of authority and status. The astonishing Oseberg ship burial in Norway, one of the richest Viking graves ever discovered contain 2 women buried with incredible wealth and ceremonial items suggesting high status. The older woman may have been a religious or political leader, showing women could hold positions of true authority. One of the most fascinating aspects of Viking women's power centers around what Norse society called the keys of the household. When a woman married, she was ceremonially given keys to the family's storage chests, food supplies, and valuables. These keys weren't just practical tools, they symbolized her authority over the household economy and resources. Many female graves contain these key sets, often displayed prominently on the woman's clothing, showing how important this role was to female identity. The woman wearing the keys made crucial decisions about food storage, textile production, and resource management that determined whether the family thrived or starved during harsh northern winters. Daily household management required significant skills. Viking women supervised food, preservation, coordinated textile production, managed supplies, and oversaw dairy processing. These weren't simple domestic tasks, but complex economic activities that required knowledge of food chemistry, weather patterns, resource allocation, and personnel management. The woman of the house often supervised servants, slaves, and younger family members in these essential tasks. The textile production overseen by Viking women wasn't just about making clothes. Archaeological finds of weaving tools in nearly every female grave show how central this work was to women's identity. The textiles women produced represented valuable trade goods and essential items for sailing ships. A single Viking sail required wool from hundreds of sheep and thousands of hours of processing and weaving. The women who created these textiles were skilled artisans whose work made Viking voyages possible. When men left on long trading or raiding expeditions, women's authority expanded even further. They ran farms, managed businesses, and made all necessary decisions in their husband's absence. In coastal areas where men might be gone for months or years, women effectively ran entire communities. This regular experience of independent authority created a culture where female leadership was normalized rather than exceptional. Evidence suggests some Viking women even participated in activities we typically associate exclusively with men. Recent scientific analysis of a high-status warrior burial from Birka, Sweden, revealed the skeleton was female, despite being buried with a full set of weapons and war horses. While this discovery remains controversial among some historians, it suggests at least some women may have taken on warrior roles. Other evidence points to women participating in trade expeditions and potentially even in overseas settlement. The famous Viking settlement of Iceland provides particularly strong evidence of women's status. The Icelandic sagas describe numerous powerful women who influenced politics, managed large estates, and even led settlement expeditions. Women like Aud the Deep-Minded, who led her own fleet of ships to Iceland after her husband's death, demonstrate how women could exercise remarkable independence. Iceland's isolation and harsh conditions may have further reinforced women's authority, as survival required full utilization of everyone's skills regardless of gender. Religious life offered another avenue for female power. Many women served as vulvas, seers, or priestesses who conducted rituals and made prophecies. Archaeological finds include elaborate staffs and unusual grave goods associated with these religious practitioners. The vulva held significant cultural authority, with even kings seeking their advice. This religious role gave certain women influence that extended far beyond the domestic sphere. The reasons for Viking women's unusual status likely stem from practical northern realities. In the challenging Scandinavian environment, communities needed everyone's skills and contributions to survive. The frequent absence of men on voyages meant women had to be capable of handling all aspects of farm and community management. This practical necessity evolved into cultural values and legal rights that formalized women's authority. How did Viking women have more rights than women in other medieval societies? Viking women could own property, manage households, conduct business, and even divorce their husbands. Rights most European women wouldn't gain until modern times. Their economic independence, legal standing, and cultural authority created opportunities unusual for the medieval period. These weren't token rights, but substantial powers that shaped both individual lives and Norse society as a whole. This aspect of Viking culture forces us to reconsider the simple brute raider stereotype. A society that granted women significant rights and authority displayed sophistication in social organization that contradicts the primitive barbarian image. Understanding Viking women's roles gives us a more complete picture of this complex society, one where gender roles, while still distinct, allowed more flexibility and respected women's contributions in ways that were centuries ahead of their contemporaries. But what actually triggered the Viking Age in the first place? While we now understand Vikings as complex people with sophisticated social structures, this still doesn't explain why, around 793 CE, these Norse farmers and traders suddenly began sailing from their homeland to raid, trade, and settle across Europe and beyond. The explosion of Viking activity that transformed early medieval Europe didn't happen by accident. A perfect storm of factors came together to launch one of history's most influential expansion movements. What would make thousands of people leave their homes to sail into the unknown on dangerous wooden ships? When we see Vikings in movies, the answer seems simple. They were violent warriors who loved adventure and plunder. But history tells a more complex story. The massive expansion that sent Norse people across Europe, into Russia, and even to North America wasn't driven by simple bloodlust. These weren't just warriors looking for a fight. They were people responding to serious problems at home. Population growth created real pressure in Scandinavia during the 8th century. Archaeological evidence shows a significant increase in the number of farms and settlements across Norway, Denmark, and Sweden in the years leading up to the Viking Age. More people meant more mouths to feed, but Scandinavia had limited farmland. Much of the region consists of mountains, forests, and terrain that can't support crops. The good farmland was already taken, divided, and subdivided among families over generations. Think about what this meant for young people in Viking society. If you were a younger son in a Norse family, you wouldn't inherit the family farm that went to the oldest son. What were your options? You could continue living on your brother's land as a dependent, try to clear new farmland from difficult terrain, or look for opportunities elsewhere. When ships started returning from early raids with valuable goods, many young men saw a path to wealth and land that wasn't available at home. Climate change played a significant role too. Between 800–1000 CE, Europe experienced what scientists call the medieval warm period. This climate shift brought warmer temperatures that actually benefited some parts of Europe, making farming easier in places like England and France. But for Scandinavia, the changes weren't always positive. Tree ring studies and ice core samples show periods of unusual weather patterns and potentially difficult growing conditions in parts of the Norse homelands. The changing climate opened new sailing routes by reducing ice in northern seas. Suddenly, voyages that had been too dangerous became possible. The sea route around the north of Britain became more reliably ice-free, opening access to Ireland and Scotland. Warmer conditions also made the North Atlantic crossings to Iceland and eventually Greenland possible for the first time. The Norse colony in Greenland could only exist because of this warmer period. When the climate cooled again in later centuries, these settlements failed. Political changes pushed many people to seek new homes. The early Viking Age coincided with the emergence of stronger kings in Scandinavia who began consolidating power. Harald Fairhair's famous unification of Norway around 870 CE forced many independent-minded chieftains and their followers to leave rather than submit to his rule. Similar processes occurred in Denmark under kings like Godfred and later Nut. Many of the first settlers in Iceland were directly fleeing this political consolidation, preferring dangerous freedom abroad to submission at home. We can see this pattern clearly in Iceland's settlement. The Icelandic sagas specifically state that many settlers came to escape the tyranny of Harald Fairhair. Archaeological evidence confirms a massive population movement from Norway to Iceland between 870 to 930 CE. These weren't raiders, but farmers looking for land where they could live by their own rules. They brought entire families, livestock, and farming equipment, clearly planning permanent settlement, not just quick raids. Technological advances created new possibilities just when these pressures were building. The development of the Viking longship around the 8th century suddenly gave Norse people the ability to travel farther, faster, and with more cargo than ever before. These ships could cross open ocean, yet still navigate shallow rivers. They could land on beaches without needing harbors. The technology arrived at exactly the right moment to turn local pressure into global expansion. Existing trade networks exposed Vikings to the wealth available in other parts of Europe. Norse traders had long maintained contact with trading centers like Hedeby and Dorstad. They knew about the rich monasteries of Britain and Ireland, the fertile farms of Francia, and the wealthy cities of the Mediterranean. When internal pressures made staying home less attractive, these known destinations offered tempting opportunities. They weren't venturing into complete unknowns, but toward places they had heard about through trade contacts. Early success created a snowball effect. The first raids brought back enough wealth to fund more ships and attract more participants. Monasteries with their gold and silver made particularly tempting targets. They were often located near the coast, poorly defended, and filled with valuable items. The success of early raids on places, like Lindisfarne in 793, encouraged more raiding. As word spread of opportunities abroad, more Norse people chose to look outward rather than struggle with limited options at home. Viking expansion followed a pattern that reveals its underlying causes. The first phase involved seasonal raiding, quick attacks followed by a return home. The second phase established trading posts and winter bases that operated year-round but weren't permanent settlements. The final phase involved actual colonization with families, farms, and new communities. This progression from raiding to settlement shows that while initial contacts might be violent, the ultimate goal for many Vikings was finding new places to live and thrive. Different regions experienced different types of Viking activity. England and Francia suffered raids, but also saw settlement in places like the Danelaw. Ireland experienced both raids and the establishment of trading towns like Dublin. Russia saw Scandinavian traders establishing routes along rivers, founding cities, and eventually blending with local populations to create the Kievan Rus state. Iceland and Greenland experienced almost pure settlement without raiding. These variations show Vikings adapted their approach based on local conditions and their own needs. The areas Vikings settled permanently tell us much about their motivations. Iceland had no native population to raid, no existing cities to attack, and no ready wealth to steal. It offered only one thing: empty land for farming. The massive Norse migration to Iceland shows that many Vikings were simply looking for farms and independence, not battles and plunder. Similarly, the Norse colonies in Greenland represented planned agricultural settlements, not raiding bases. An important point often overlooked is that going Viking was often a temporary career, not a lifetime identity. Many Norse men went on raids or trading expeditions for a few years in their youth, earned enough wealth to establish themselves, and then returned home to become farmers for the rest of their lives. The archaeological record shows many wealthy farms in Scandinavia owned by men who used their raid or trade profits to establish themselves as respectable landowners. Why did Vikings suddenly expand beyond Scandinavia in the first place? A combination of population pressure, climate change, political shifts, and technological advances created both the need and the means for expansion. These factors came together in the late 8th century to create perfect conditions for the explosion of Norse activity we call the Viking Age. It wasn't simple bloodlust, but a complex response to real challenges at home and opportunities abroad. Understanding these motivations helps us see Vikings as real people responding to challenges rather than one-dimensional raiders. They made rational choices based on the options available to them. When we recognize the pressures that drove Viking expansion, we can appreciate the Norse not just as warriors, but as farmers seeking land, political refugees fleeing centralized power, traders looking for opportunity, and explorers pushing the boundaries of the known world. So we've seen that Vikings were far more than the one-dimensional raiders from our TV screens. They were skilled traders who created networks spanning 3 continents. They were master craftspeople who produced intricate art that still amazes us today. They were innovative shipbuilders whose vessels revolutionized travel. They were explorers who reached North America 500 years before Columbus. The next time you see those stereotypical horned helmets, remember the real Vikings behind the myths. Their legacy surrounds us. In place names across Europe, in words we use daily, in navigation techniques still studied by sailors, and in art styles that continue to influence modern designers.